Hello and welcome to the Decking Awesome Games podcast. My name is Owen and I'm joined by the awesome Ciara and Brian.
Hello.
Today we are talking about Pandemic, the board game. We're going to discuss what themes and mechanics it has, why it is so popular, and what makes it different to other board games. We've played Pandemic loads of times. Some of my best board game memories are with this game. So why is Pandemic awesome?
Pandemic is a really flexible game. It's perfect for people who have never played any advanced board games before and are looking to get into something with a little more substance than your Scrabbles and old-fashioned board games. It's got a really strong team, and it's about getting rid of 4 disease spreading throughout the world. And it's a co-op game, so it means that it's not so overwhelming for people coming in. But I guess there's kind of a lot of different elements that are wrapped up in that.
I think its replayability is my favorite bit about it, because every game is different. Where the viruses start and spread is set up by a randomly drawn deck of cards, and then each new virus that comes out is always random again on top of that. And I know the cards will start repeating themselves as epidemics start coming up, but the fact that it's different and you have to focus on different areas and you can play different roles and different focuses and different strategies for winning means that you're never playing the same game twice. It does have massive replayability without complexity of changing around the setup to make it different.
Yeah, I love that. I love that replayability and variety it brings in, especially for a teamwork style game. It means that if you're advanced playing this game, if you've played it a couple of times, you can bring in new people to the hobby. You can all work together, and there's no sort of competitive edge to it, but it's still a fresh and new game each time you pick it up and play.
Yeah, and for the casual or people coming in who wouldn't have maybe played so much before, being able to adjust difficulty levels and adapt the game based on the characters played and loads of different mechanics within it, while still keeping the game quite simple, means that it can be approachable for anyone starting out. Yeah.
It also has a lot of spin-off games coming out of it. Pandemic's been around for a while now, so it has a lot of different types of add-ons and own separate games in their own right. There are lots of games like that, like Fall of Rome, where you're fighting off a horde of marauders coming in to destroy Rome. There's also legacy games where it's got this kind of compelling story arc to it, where you play over multiple games. There's a whole bunch of different spin-offs to Pandemic, which are really exciting and really kind of entertaining.
Oh, I love the legacy games. The fact that it's basically just the base game of Pandemic, where there is consequences for your decisions during the game. If you decide to go, we won't worry about South America, just leave that be a problem unto itself. Next game, South America is going to get you.
Yeah, I love that consequences and stuff like that. It's a very kind of new style of board game. You can only play it once, but by the end of that legacy game, you do get a copy of Pandemic that you can play with. Yeah, it's just such a fun style of doing it. You do. After you finish Pandemic Legacy Season 1, you get a Pandemic game.
Well, we love the game mechanics. They fit really well into the team, and that cohesiveness is what really draws us to a game, I think, in general. The team is that a group of skilled epidemiologists travel around the world trying to save it from a virus. So your player board is a map of the world. It matches in. The viruses spread with tokens, so you can kind of see it spread like you would on pretty much any maps of pandemics that come out. And then the cards give you a feel for time traveling. So as cards are drawn, you can feel the pandemic lengthen. So it matches really well.
I like the kind of, you've only got a couple of actions on your turn, so you have to use them wisely. Now, are you going to go and deal with the outbreak that's happening across the world and try and get all the way over there to just mitigate it a little bit so it's still a problem but it's not devastating? Or, do you try and cut off another virus and try and get it cured before it starts growing out of control too? So you kind of have to make the decisions on, sacrifice here in favor of here, or try and play the long game and hope you don't run out of cards. And as you said, with the time passing in the game with the deck of cards, that you don't run out of them before everything goes to crap.
Yeah, because at the start of Pandemic, it gives you like a set of 9 locations where the pandemic begins. And so hopefully they can be kind of grouped together. You might have like a few in Asia, you might have a few in Europe, and then it's up to you to kind of decide, all right, well, there's one kind of that keeps popping up in South America, but like we've only got 3 players here. We can't kind of deal with that. There might be other ways you can kind of get back those cubes. So that kind of choice you have to make is very kind of cool, very kind of interesting and thematic.
Yeah, I think that I guess Africa and South America, because they point outwards, it can be really hard. Not that we haven't sacrificed Asia a few times.
Yeah.
The only reason we don't sacrifice Europe so much is because there's always an outbreak in Europe. So it's always safe to send somebody over there to hang around, because there's so many cities that leaving somebody there is like a valid game move. I think
you start the game in North America. So North America does tend to get sorted out pretty quickly.
Yeah, unfairly advantaged.
You probably just start. If you started off in South America or started off in Africa, we definitely would have sorted those out first.
Yeah, but you start off in America, and Europe has too many cities.
Yeah.
And I think some of the times that I think have made the most interesting games are when you start off and the 9 cities you start with are like in 2 continents. So you're we'll focus on those 2 continents, and then the first 16 cards you draw are all in like a 3rd continent, and then you have to decide, am I going to sacrifice the like 2 rounds it's going to take to send somebody to that continent, because you can't build a center there unless you've been there before. So you have to like go the long way that first time, and you really have to like sacrifice because the limited actions is a feature of the game. You really have to like commit to whatever you decide to do.
Yeah, that way off between short-term strategy and long-term strategy, where save yourself now and potentially doom yourself for the end game, or take the hit now, take a couple of bruises in hopes of having a good strategy in the long run. And actually, that works quite well with the cooperative side of it as well, because everyone has their own abilities that differ from each other. You have to decide, should I use my turn to set up my teammates so that their turns are easier and they can make a bigger difference, or should I spend my turn just curing the area around me to make it easier to avoid an outbreak where I am? So you kind of, it's one of those games where you have to work together, but you also have to work for yourself a bit as well.
Yeah, I think the player-specific roles comes into this quite a lot as well. So like each player takes on, whether they're like a medic or researcher or a dispatcher, that kind of brings it in together to make it a lot more thematic, and everybody has their own kind of role inside the team and different strengths and advantages. And
I love the medic. You have to play with the medic. He is so powerful.
You can't win Pandemic if you don't have a medic.
It rhymes. It must be true.
One of the most interesting mechanics in the game is the cooperative element of the game. Every player is working together. So, teams that work together well playing the game really have a big impact on how likely they are to be successful. So if you're going to have some vigilante who's just like, I'm going to sweep into this set of cities and be the hero and save this area, but that actually doesn't help your long-term goal, or if they have the cards you need to win, what you really need is for them to not save a set of cities, but actually hand over their cards to you. That really has a really big impact on whether you're going to win or not. You have to kind of give up a lot of your individual goals in order to get the collective to win.
Yeah, it's a hard mental switch for some players to do. I've seen it a couple of times where players will still think, although it's a cooperative game, they're going to try and be the best at being the cooperative game. And so they'll use their cards to help them get the places and take things out, and they'll kind of do a very good individual effort. Individual effort doesn't mean a whole lot in Pandemic. You can't win on your own.
Yeah, that's true. Because while you may have made a devastatingly brilliant move, the person who's going next can't do anything because you've just ignored them, and they're going to start taking scars and injuries because there's outbreaks in their area, and you've just swanned off saving the rest of the world while abandoning them.
The game has great replayability, so I think that no matter how many times we've played the game, we've always found it interesting. I don't think we've ever won the hard mode easily. I don't think it's ever been a walk in the park. I think because of the way it's generated and how big the world is, even if you constantly get clusters in one area and you can fight them off and you dedicate your time fighting them off, there'll always be one round where you get a bunch of cities that are nowhere near anything. And if just left untended, that will eventually lose you the game if you don't do anything about it. So I think that sort of strategizing and having to decide on risk really has an impact on its replayability, because there's less variability.
Another big thing about replayability is the Epidemic Cards. It's a very kind of easy and simple way to understand how to add in difficulty. So like you'll have 3 epidemic cards in a player deck if you want to make it kind of easy, and you can just keep adding in more and more as you want to play, and changes the game quite a lot. Because the less epidemics you have, the more chance you have to go to different locations around the world. So if you put in loads and loads of epidemics, you're more or less saying that the spread of the outbreak is going to be concentrated onto less locations, making it more difficult, but in a different way. So you can have the focus. And it can be a little bit tricky for new players to understand. They have to kind of split the deck into like 7 different parts if you've got 7 epidemic cards, and then kind of shuffle them in. But I just say, just do it. You don't really have to understand why you're doing it, and then play. And then you'll understand why it's there afterwards.
The instructions are pretty clear. Like I know there was a few very technical questions, probably more in the legacy games than in the normal game, but it felt like the instructions covered everything. If you just blindly followed them for setup, you got to the end and you ended up with a good game, even if you didn't understand why you had to do some of this stuff.
Okay, so what makes Pandemic different to other games?
I think Pandemic has a unique blend of, a cooperative element, but an easy to pick up game. So like, if you sit down, you've never played a game before, you're playing with 1 or 2 people who have, you can figure out fairly quickly how to play and what you should be doing. And, because it's cooperative, you can work with those people and be like, oh, what if I went over here? And they might go, oh, well, we can get over there on our next turn. You probably need to focus over here. And then you can kind of work together. So you feel involved in the game from the word go, but also you don't need a huge level of understanding to get into the game, because it is relatively straightforward. And even if you don't win your first couple of games, your strategies start getting better and better, and you learn where you need to concentrate your efforts, especially depending on the different roles you have. So it's very easy to pick up, and it's very easy to get good at. And then if you get too good at it, throw in a few more epidemic cards, ramp up the difficulty.
Yeah, because it's tricky to understand that there's very limited actions that the player can make. They pretty much just can move, they can take away cubes, and they can play cards. And then you also have this thing of trying to find the vaccine. But the vaccine thing doesn't come in until later. So it can be very easy for a new player to come in and just start messing around. But those very small actions can build up. You can get yourself into a bad position. You have to have a good long-term scope of it. But for new players, they don't. They can just go, I have a disease, I have an outbreak right beside me. I'm going to go over, I want to sort it out, and it's going to help. And they don't have to understand why. And then as the game progresses, they can kind of understand the kind of meatier depth of the game.
And I think that it rewards an analytical approach to solving how to do this. So maybe you want to stay on the border of an outbreak and kind of wander around the border of it to contain it. Or maybe you want to go straight into the center and wipe it out from the middle. But it rewards that your choices if they're logical and if you keep a clear head while you're making them. So I think that's another thing that usually when we pick a good strategy and we stick to it, that's when the games go smoothest. So it kind of shows that you're kind of a little bit in sync. And obviously the playing things like your role, which is like a career, to your advantage. So roles like the medics and things like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of different strategies for actually winning, which is pretty good. Like most of them are kind of pushing down the outbreaks, but you also have choices you're going to make of after you find the vaccine, do you then push it across the world? Because the goal is to find the 4 vaccines, not to make sure everyone in the world has the vaccine. So it can be tricky to weigh the pros and cons.
Oh yeah, do you focus on eradicating the disease so none of those cubes can come up again, or do you just go, well, it's cured, let's just deal with it as it pops up and try and cure all the other ones? So once you have the vaccination for them all, you've won. But sometimes it's worth taking that extra couple of turns just to eradicate it, get all the yellow cubes off the board, and then bam, don't have to worry about yellow cards coming up ever again.
Yeah, because if you start off the game and you're getting a lot of red cards that are coming from Asia, you're probably better off eradicating it, because then all those cards, when they come up, nothing happens. You don't get any more cubes in the board, and you can kind of focus on it. But if you get a variety of cards at the start, you got to weigh that up and down. Maybe it's not worth it. It also depends on your roles, because different roles mean different strategies. So if you're like a dispatcher, you're probably not going to be moving around a lot. You can be kind of giving the advantage to someone else to do stuff. But yeah, it depends entirely on what you want to do, and you can also come up with your own strategies. Yeah, and it's an interesting game because you don't see a whole lot of great cooperative games like this. So it's always a great game to have in your board game collection, especially if you've just had like a very competitive few board game nights with your friends, a lot of kind of aggressive fighting and like a lot of, and you just want to like retouch as to why board games are awesome. It's because you're playing with friends and you're all playing together. Pandemic is a great one to bring out to realize that we're all kind of just having fun together rather than trying to beat each other.
Save the world and save your friendship.
It's one or the other.
Like I think the quality of the game as well, like even though, you know, the pieces are quite simple, like you're just playing with pawns, you're not playing with little really elaborate pieces unless you've 3D printed your own, and if you have, kudos, send us a few, will you? But you're just playing with little pawns and moving them around. But like, I mean, you're not in it for the high quality miniatures. It's the, you know, the little kind of glossy looking cubes and the pawns running around knocking them off the board and stuff like that. It just feels like a good quality game with very simple pieces, but that work perfectly for the game itself.
And it seems like it was playtested very thoroughly before it was released. Like, it seems that the different areas on the map all have different kind of attributes, but they're all balanced. Like, you can make a lot of different choices in the game, and it feels like you do have an impact based on what you choose, and also that impact is kind of matches what you would expect the impact to be. And the trackers make logical sense. It kind of, the cards tell you when to move them and things like that, so you don't forget about them as much. As like sometimes it can be hard to remember a tracker, or we're terrible for forgetting to move first player tokens around. But in this game, it seems like it logically happens as part of the flow, and there's not too much to keep track of. There's only 2 trackers outside of the actual map, and then everything else you're putting board or cubes on the board. So you kind of feel like it's quite easy to follow, and cubes are quite good visual indicator of how well you're doing.
Yeah.
And you don't want too many cubes.
The board just full of them and you're going, well, we're definitely dead in 2 turns.
Yeah, because so much is done with the cards and going through the card deck, and that adds a lot of the variety and stuff like that. It's quite easy to keep track of then without having extra mechanics in to show events happening or time passing.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of simplistic, very well done, and kind of clear. Are there any other areas of Pandemic that show off how awesome it is?
I mean, I know we talked about it a bit earlier, but the legacy games, I actually think I prefer the legacy games to the base game. As amazing as the base game is, the legacy games are amazing because it does have consequence. It does have follow on. You know, you're basically playing Pandemic over the course of 12 months. So you play January, February, all the way up to December. And the first game is just, you know, a basic game of Pandemic, but, you know, maybe the virus mutates, or maybe there's extra complications, or now you can't build in this area, or now you move on to February and now all of a sudden the areas that you've let get out of control, now they're very problematic because now the mutated virus can't be cured, and now you're struggling to find a way to beat it. And I don't want to give too much away from the legacy games, but it just gets crazy out of hand. And just when you think you're on top of it, the game throws you another twist, like, oh, open box H there, nothing to worry about. And then you open up and go, oh my God, this is going to destroy us in the next game. I cannot believe this.
Or you choose a strategy and you are like, this is a great strategy, we are sorted. And you paid 3 months with that strategy and you invest heavily in that strategy, because a lot of the decisions you make have an impact later. So like, you have to invest in some things. You have to invest in like building things, or you have to invest in doing things. But one of the strategies we chose on one of the types of actions you could take, we invested in for months, and then only to read one of the boxes and go, oh no.
Yeah.
That has a really big impact on destroying our strategy.
If you chose this strategy, ha 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 ha, you're screwed.
Yeah, and you might think, like, listening about the legacy games, especially with Pandemic, that you're just kind of like playing January and then you rip up a load of cards and you put in new cards for February. It really does depend on what you do in January when it comes to legacy games. So you got like side objectives and you got like other things you can do. And depending on how far you get to them or what happens in your game board state, then you'll start to like read parts, and then it'll be like kind of different things will happen to your game than it would someone else playing in January. So like when we finished Legacy, there was lots of boxes that weren't opened for us. That was because there's things that we didn't let happen or things that we didn't push. And then so then that makes our game totally different. And then also on each location and everything else, you can, you know, do buildings and outbreaks might happen and stuff like that. So you can then affect the board so that when you start the board again and you play in February, the outbreaks might happen worse in some places than they would in others, or the city might be like more damaged. So it's easier to kind of take over.
And you can invest in trying to fix things that you might have messed up in one game.
Yeah.
You can spend the next few games giving any benefits that might happen at the end of the game to a particular area on the board that maybe suffered because you ignored it for one of the games.
Yeah, you might feel bad if you're like a normal board gamer looking at legacy games going, I don't want to rip up board games. I don't want to get to like, July and then find out that we've lost and we can't do anything. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. I just like play the game. You won't get into that issue. If you lose twice, I think it tells you that you've lost. But you can just keep playing.
If you lose twice, it just goes, here, open a box that makes this easier, move on to the next month, pretend everything went well.
Yeah, you can't lose. So like just try and just go with the flow. Don't take it all too seriously. And just kind of enjoy the experience of playing a living game. Yeah.
And I know like some out there might be hesitant to go, look, I don't want to drop this money on a game that I'm just going to end up ripping up and then throwing out when it's over. I mean, you could frame the boards. Some people apparently frame the boards. Ours is sitting in a box up in our study. So, but like at minimum, you get 12 games out of it. And if you only get 12 games out of Pandemic Legacy, you have played a phenomenal game. You have not lost. You've had nothing go wrong for you, and you've made all the right decisions from start to finish. Pat yourself on the back. That was well worth the money you dropped. But if it didn't go as great for you, maybe you get 14, 16, 18 games out of it because, you've lost a month, so you have to replay it. And it's actually, it's brilliant. You never feel like it's a waste of money because it's a game you just keep coming back to and it just keeps evolving and changing. So I think it's a great investment if you're looking for a legacy type game to play.
Yeah, I wasn't as impressed with season 2 as I was with season 1. I'd recommend season 1 to anybody. Season 2, the production quality was actually better, and the components and the visuals were a lot better. But I don't know. I thought season 1 was just more kind of compelling.
I think in season 2 they had to bring in quite a lot of complex rules. So they kind of, I guess, there's only so much there is a limit on what you can do with Pandemic. So they brought in a different situation, and those rules added a little more complexity. Then I think the simplicity of Pandemic is where it's like real beauty lies, and some of that had to be lost in season 2 to make it more interesting and more different.
Yeah. So if you're considering starting a legacy game, go for season 1 and then build up to season 2, because season 1 is still just the base game with added complications, whereas season 2 is a whole other ball game unto itself.
Yeah, when it comes to like other Pandemic games, I really enjoy Pandemic the Cure because I love dice, and so they've added in dice into Pandemic. It makes it much easier to take out and kind of play. It's a smaller board. You kind of just have to roll dice, and based on those, you kind of get different actions you can do. So it's got to kind of push your luck kind of element to it. So it's a different kind of game than Pandemic. But I think people who enjoy Pandemic and enjoy dice games would really like Pandemic the Cure. It's a little bit less strategic. Doesn't take as long. So I think you don't go into it expecting a more deep game.
It also takes up less table space, so it's good for moving around. I think I quite like it because it kind of focuses on that simplicity. There's kind of a very limited area. It's not as strategic, but good if you just want to burn a short amount of time playing something that you really enjoy.
I suppose it makes sense that Owen, you just love the Cure with your, let's call it a spade, your dice addiction. It's an addiction.
It's not doing me any harm. So I don't know why you call it an addiction rather than a hobby.
Oh, that's just because he rolls well.
It's just normal for a person to have hundreds of dice in their house, isn't it?
Totally. Pandemic Fall of Rome was another one that we've played. It's probably more, I don't know, it's a very good game, but it's very different from normal Pandemic. I would say that because it's about armies and moving them around, it's a little more aggressive, and yet I guess the virus in Pandemic does act a bit like an army moving forward. So maybe it's not. I guess the team, I don't associate with the team as much, but I definitely like the gameplay. The gameplay is good, having to move troops around, getting places takes time, and you have to open up corridors. So all that strategic and long-term view, impacting your short-term plans, like that stays true in the Fall of Rome version. But yeah, I guess the only thing that I'd say is I probably don't associate as much with the team as I would to Pandemic. Yeah,
Pandemic tried to branch out to other different types of teams because the same principle of their game applies. It doesn't have to be about outbreaks of diseases. It can be about anything. So they have one where there's like water going over Amsterdam, and you have to kind of build dams all over the place. And then you've also
Amsterdam.
and so that's kind of because like disease kind of spreads like water. So it kind of makes sense from a mechanical point of view. They're just trying what team works for this. And then obviously for Fall of Rome, the team is this. So they're trying different kind of teams, seeing what works. There's a lot of cool new mechanics in Fall of Rome that if you've played Pandemic before, you'll understand them really well, but you'll also be entertained by this new kind of mechanics and how they link in. So if you're feeling like you don't want to get involved in a legacy game, or you finished the legacy game and you don't really want the kind of standard version of Pandemic, definitely check out Fall of Rome or these other ones. I think we're just mentioning Fall of Rome. It doesn't seem to be the best one out of the mix of these new team Pandemics. But I think that's just my opinion because it's got dice in it. So when you attack stuff, you can roll a dice to see if you win, rather than previously where it's an action to win in Pandemic.
Yeah, I have to say I'm very excited to see what comes out of the Pandemic family of games next. But they seem to keep pitching winners.
So yeah, we are recording this as coronavirus is spreading through the world. We hope everyone stays safe out there. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and socially distance. Look out for the most vulnerable in society. That pretty much wraps it up for Pandemic the board game. If you enjoyed it, share it. We've been decking out some games. Thanks for listening. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.